Good morning and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known on this Friday, January 14th, 2022. This morning, gun violence in America. Why has it spiraled out of control? What is being done to stop it? We discuss with our panel this morning. But first, the headlines as we bring on our panel. Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times, ReShonda Tate Billingsley, the managing editor of the Defender Network, and Sam P.K. Collins of the Washington Informer. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Well, our first news topic of the morning, President Biden has struck out in his attempts to persuade holdout Senate Democrats to go around or abolish the filibuster to get voting rights legislation through Congress. The White House, led by the president, had engaged in a fiery campaign to push bills through that would protect voters.
I will not support separate actions.
That would protect voters against the cavalcade of suppression laws that have passed in Republican-led states in reaction to...
I will not support separate actions that worsen the...
We're hearing from the speech from Senator Kirsten Sinema as to why she has betrayed her party and betrayed
I will not support
those who voted her in.
That worsen the underlying disease of division infecting our country.
Yeah, her reasons for not supporting quashing the filibuster. Sam, I'm going to start with you, Sam, because I know the ladies are loaded for bear this morning, so I'll let the gentleman in this case go first.
We're speaking in terms of gun violence.
No, right now we're going to speak in terms of that headline. The Kirsten Sinema from Arizona and Joe Manchin from West Virginia have all but scuttled any attempts to pass any meaningful voting rights.
Beautiful. Well, real quick, I've always said that the Democratic Party were moderate centrist, and what we're seeing is a schism between the centrist corporatist wing and the Progressive Party. And I am asking people to reconsider their relationship with the Democratic Party. And those who disagree often think about the worst case scenario, and they often think about the alternative, and they act as though there is no alternative, when in fact power is in the hands of the people. And for far too long, Black people especially have had their power siphoned by Democrats who wait until election time to give us promises and kick down these promises down the road, or kicking the can down the road, so to speak. So what we're seeing is unchecked power that has been manifesting for quite some time, when moderate Democrats have not really held on to their end of the bargain. This is nothing new.
Yeah, and here's the other thing too, ReShonda Tate Billingsley. Before the president has scheduled a meeting with the Democratic caucus, the Senate Democrats, and before he got there, Senator Sinema and Manchin took to the House floor and said, basically, there's no need for him to come here. We're not going to go along with it. That is embarrassing from your own party, isn't it?
It is, and I think ultimately we're going to pay the price. I hear what Sam's saying, but right now, all we have are the Democratic and the Republican Party. And, we can mobilize, we can go and try and do a third party, but right now, this is what we have. And we're going to end up in seeing another person, another Trump in office, if not him, coming back because of division in the Democratic Party. These two right now are holding all the keys. As I heard someone say that Manchin and Sinema are really the president, because they're the ones that hold the key to what happens, whether we make any progress or not in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, there has been a couple of Republicans who have said that Joe Manchin has called him the president. Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times, she says that they are the president, but then there are some who say they are really Republican plants.
Yeah, I mean, they've hijacked it. They really have hijacked our democracy. And the civil rights, this particular voting measure is very important. I think this is really part of an overall strategy to ensure that, one, it's not voted for, right? Because they can't even force closure. They can't even get what they need to get it to to the floor. What's really interesting is this voting rights. It is really for the people. It's a really for the people act, and there are a lot of things in this particular voting act that people really need to know about. It has a lot of disclosure about foreign governments, if there's any information, the restoration of rights, voting rights to formerly incarcerated, and even more interestingly, and I know in the state of Maryland, we have probably the worst redistricting maps that's been put forth, and even our governor has threatened for the federal government to sue him, and so it gives it to a third party, and then there's accountability of the Supreme Court in terms of ethics. So there are a lot of things that are riding on this Voting Rights Act that I believe that the Republican Party really does not want to see this on the floor or even considered.
Well, and to go along with that, just a footnote to that, Paris, is that in these suppression bills that have come up in Republican-led states around the country, part of those bills says who gets to count the vote as well. So yes, they're even taking away the ability for a bipartisan effort to count the vote. They want staunch Republicans, not just Republicans, but they want Trump-like Republicans to count the vote. So that's something to watch. And yesterday, we met with White House senior advisor Cedric Richmond, who continued the administration's forceful tone on voting rights with a blistering attack on Republicans and former President Donald Trump. Richmond, who served as Louisiana's representative in the U.S. House for a decade before assuming his current role as the White House Office of Public Engagement Director, said during a Zoom gathering of reporters that voting rights are the bedrock of democracy. But he said GOP lawmakers have a palpable fear of Trump and also losing re-election bids if they go along with Democrats who want to make voting easier for all Americans. Cedric Richmond went on to say, and I quote, "Let me be very clear. What has changed is Donald Trump and his stronghold on the Republican Party and people who don't want to get primaried." He said that pretty much that these legislators, these Republican legislators, are Donald Trump puppets, basically. But here we have a situation where the people voted them in, right? Not Donald Trump.
Absolutely, and this is, and you're right. They're scared, and kudos to him for calling that out. And we have to continue. But I think one of the things that, and I think as a Black paper, we need to really communicate. This is a literally break down, give a Cliff Note version of voting rights, and really, because one of the things we can do is continue to call our representatives about of how this is, because I used to work on Capitol Hill, and it's the calls from the constituents and they have to be recorded, by the way. And so almost, hey, this spell it out and what it means for each district. And I think we need to be educated fully about the impact of the voting rights. And I'm glad he called it out. And you're absolutely right. Every single one of them are scared. And so I really think, and I agree, that democracy right now is being threatened. It is on trial.
Yeah, well, ReShonda, one of the things that Cedric Richmond pointed out in a discussion yesterday was that in 2006, Republican President George Bush pushed for an extension of the Voting Rights Act, and 16 Republicans who are still in power today, they voted for that. So what has happened since 2006? ReShonda, can you explain why these Republicans, other than what Cedric Richmond said, that they are so afraid of Donald Trump?
It's absolutely that. Trump happened. That's what happened. Trump happened. And they do not want to get on his bad side, because getting on his bad side, all he cares about is making sure you're loyal to him. And they're worried that if he gets on his bad side, that it could cost them their position. They've seen it happen, and they don't. So they'd rather sit on the sidelines and watch voting rights be dismantled. And right now there are 0 Republicans supporting it. There are Republicans that believe in voting rights. They believe in this act itself, but they don't want to take that chance in going up against Trump. We've seen Lindsey Graham flip. Even Kevin McCarthy this time last year was, speaking out against Trump, and he saw that could be damaging to his career. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. For me, the Republicans play chess. Democrats play checkers. And the Republicans are looking at the long game. They're like, okay, we're going to ride this out because we don't want to get on Trump's bad side.
Well, Sam, you were talking a little bit ago about this blind support, if you will, of the Democratic Party from African Americans, and ReShonda had chimed in that right now these are the only choices. But Sam, I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that.
I really appreciate that opportunity. In terms of this being our only choice, I humbly disagree in the sense that politics is much more than voting. And other racial groups and ethnic groups, they often consolidate their economic power before they consider the vote. So everything that we've seen happening in terms of the lobbying and in terms of the support against voting rights has been a culmination of first the change in the redistricting, as well as the lobbying power of groups that don't want to see us consolidate our vote. But the fact remains that Black people, especially those of us who are CEOs, who are mavens of industry, we have to consolidate our economic power, and we have to build institutions that prepare our young people and create communities of our own, where through which we can pretty much expand our power and not only just use voting. Oftentimes, it's Black people, we depend on the vote, and I understand that the vote has garnered us so much power, but the extent to which we have that power has often been called into question because we are not buying politicians, so to speak. Politicians are buying us, and we are not leveraging our power. But the way to leverage our power, in addition to voting rights, is building economic power and then fostering a racial identity and understanding our history and understanding that for as long as we have been in this country as African Americans, that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have voted against our interests. As a matter of fact, if you study history, you have seen that Democrats and Republicans have worked together and formed compromises to our detriment. So we have to think within that lens when acting politically, and we have to redefine politics as it relates to our lives. We have to develop a race consciousness and vote and organize among those lines. I am not talking about mobilization. Mobilization means you are going somewhere without a plan. I'm talking about a long-term game where we abandon class and we have people who have the money, who are race conscious, and who develop institutions and develop mechanisms, race conscious mechanisms through which we buy politicians. The game is about money, and those of us who have money do not have voices because we continue to listen to Joe Biden, we continue to listen to James Clyburn and other people of that ilk who want us to vote Democrat, and they call Donald Trump the boogeyman, when in fact Joe Biden is just as bad as Donald Trump in many respects. And I stand on that.
Wow, powerful this morning. Sam has brought the heat to the Biden administration and really to all politicians this morning. And man, that's worth a conversation that we're going to have to continue. But this morning, firearm homicides and suicides are an urgent public health concern in the United States. And it also shows that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention noted that guns were involved in 75% of all homicides and 91% of homicides involving young people between 2018 and 2019, a rate basically unchanged from previous years. What are we doing about gun violence? I'm going to start Paris and Baltimore. We know that there's been some issues there. What's going on with gun violence? Why has it risen so drastically among young people?
You know, that's a very good question, because we certainly don't sell guns. But it's interesting now, and I have to say that the fact that they're now making it a health issue. And one of the things that I found very interesting in reading the report is it's now a health issue because now we also see an uptick of 80% when it comes to suicide, right, amongst white males. So now it's becoming an increasing health issue now because it's not only increasing in our community or staying consistent, but now they're starting to see it in rural communities. So there's an uptick in rural communities. And I have to admit, we have to be concerned because the number two cause of death among youth is suicide. Number three, and that is equivalent to cancer as a health issue. And number three is homicide. So so that is equivalent to COVID, right? So the top, so it is a serious health issue. Do I have any solutions? I have no idea. They suggested things like, green space, mental health issue, and mental health also is a big issue. But really, we have to talk about access. How do we ensure that they're not so accessible? These are kids that are killing each other and suicide. Like, how did they get the guns? Some of these are underage. And so somewhere they're getting access to something they shouldn't even have access to. And we need not go into the story where the parent bought the gun. And mind you, they tell you, well, on this day, I'm going to go in there and kill somebody. And well, we don't listen. And they go up there and they shoot them up. So, I mean, there are also a lot of mental issues associated with it. I don't know if it's because of COVID or lockdown that we're seeing the increase, but I can tell you that we don't import the guns, but the youth have access to guns.
Yeah, and I know that the Defender Network, I want to go to you, ReShonda, next, because I know the Defender has published several stories on gun violence.
That's right. This is a topic we've been exploring for a while here now, primarily because of Texas gun laws that I think will ultimately be detrimental to the Black community. We have, as of January 1st, turned to permitless carry. So you don't have to have any kind of permit. You can carry a gun. And what's going to end up happening is Black men in particular, are going to end up bearing the brunt of that. And so it goes back to what Paris was saying, the availability of guns. And, it's the ease in which students or people can get them. Now, here's one of my concerns with it. I think social media is playing a big part in this, in terms of how it's affecting the gun violence among youth. You're seeing all of this, these people trying to make themselves out to be big and bad on social media. I have 3 teenagers, and I see it constantly. And it's a badge of honor, if you will, and they're seeing it across social media. So that's one of the things that's playing a role in why we're seeing it so much in our community. I think it's great that the CDC has shined a light on this and made it a public health concern. As Paris said, I don't know where we go from here. In Houston, I think it's only going to get, in Texas, period, only going to get worse.
Yeah, and Sam Collins, the Washington Informer is located in Southeast Washington, D.C., and we know that almost every day, if not every day, there's a shooting. What's the feeling there as far as any solutions to this?
Very good question. And I just want to back up a point that ReShonda made earlier about social media. What we're seeing, especially in the age of COVID, with a lot of young people being in the house and quarantined, is an increase in anxiety and anger that often manifests in gun violence. And a lot of young people have taken their beefs into social media. So when the school year opened, even though it might have not been with guns, there was a lot of violence at the beginning of the school year when young people went into schools. In terms of the feeling of community members in Southeast, it often runs the gamut. Right now, the DC government is funding a holistic approach to gun violence by including public health officials, including job developers, including economic developers, and even including former reformed returning citizens who have clout within the community, bringing them all together to anticipate where gun violence will occur and work with feuding communities. They want to take this holistic approach to make sure that we are not necessarily depending exclusively on the police to attack gun violence. At the very same time, you have people, especially those who are victims of gun violence, who want a more hardline approach to this issue. So how to tackle gun violence in Southeast in particular, and in any disenfranchised community, often has this split between people who want a more holistic, softer approach and people who want more of a police presence. And if you look back, you saw that this was often the case, especially after George Floyd. So we were all protesting at the White House. We all wanted to make sure that police were held accountable. But then after that, we saw violence increase. And then the conversation got, well, you guys, y'all want police, but these kids are killing each other. And then even politicians use that to peddle their, peddle their ideas about what a safe community looks like. So it's definitely a split between whether to increase police or to increase services.
Yeah, and as the banner suggested, Paris, research has shown that economic hardship is directly tied to the lack of trust, also the lack of trust, I should say, in institutions with firearm homicide rates. So speak about that piece there, if you will, Paris, about the economic hardship that accompanies this.
Yes, we do see it a lot in our community. I mean, we have chronic economic issues in our community. They have programs that help there, and so you do see success stories. We love to report about those success stories. Our governor has allocated additional funds because this is such a big issue. Yeah, and in Baltimore, we do. They're daily. There's killings in our community. Our mayor has stepped up, taken a real hardline approach to we will make sure that our communities are safe, and then there's been offered incentives and so we've been able to solve some of the cases. But in terms of the it's crazy the amount of access that they're getting. These are young people killing young people. I really don't know. I wish I had the answer. We have success stories, but then what's happening is far outweighing that.
Yeah,
and like Sam said, it's tough. It's tough. We're talking about long-term solutions, right? Again, like he said, economic solutions. What's the alternative than being on the street? Like, what do we do? What's the game plan? And I really think it takes a village. Mm-hmm. It's going to take the community. It's going to take leaders. It's going to take companies, CEOs. We all get together and say, we're going to take back our city. Because right now it's been relinquished to what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. But ReShonda, here's the other point, though. You mentioned about we talk about the gun violence and we talk about the Black community in particular. But here's the other thing. Sam mentioned George Floyd and folks like that. Cops are doing it too, right? They are part of and in a lot of cases, they seem to be a part of the problem.
Absolutely. One of the things that we'd like to hope in our optimistic world is that seeing the convictions of people, the killers of George Floyd and the Ahmaud Arbery's, even though that wasn't a police officer, but seeing convictions of white men when they take the life of a Black man, we'd like to hope that would be some kind of deterrent. That's our optimism speaking, but we need to see more prosecution of those officers. One of the things that we're seeing here in Houston, and back to your economic support, is our mayor here has adopted policies and practices to strengthen the economic support for individuals and families. And what he's doing with that is like providing generous unemployment benefits or working to prevent evictions, because we found that those things have a direct link to increased gun violence. So he's focused a lot. We have a Black police chief. So they are really focused on holding officers accountable. They're focused on that economic support. And we'd like to hope that that will eventually make a difference. Right now, we're dealing with one of the highest homicide rates that the city has seen in a long time. So we'll see how it works out.
Well, Sam Collins, isn't that, this is part of ongoing history, right? When you have repressed and suppressed people, you're going to have violence. Isn't that so?
Yeah, and it's all part of the game plan, quite frankly. At this point, they don't really have to do anything to us. We are doing it to ourselves. And, that's not specific to this era. That has always been the case as long as there's been Black people of African descent consolidated in one place. It's just that this time and age, we don't really have any control over our affairs, or rather, we don't assume control over our affairs. And, and speaking about the need for police, I stand to argue that, the problem goes well beyond police. We have broken families, we have broken institutions, we have communities that are not really communities. People don't talk to one another. People are afraid to be held accountable about what they do with their children in every aspect of their lives. People are dependent more and more on the government for a solution rather than turning inward. And, at the threat of taking off my reporter hat for a second, in reporting about these events, I often take a more nuanced look at the situation. And I would like to see a day where we police our own communities and where we are less dependent on police for solutions, because that is often the big concern. If we're talking about cutting police budgets, then how do we reconcile that with the increasing violence? I say, well, listen, we need to become more of a community, and we need to love ourselves more. We need to manifest that love in many different things, because police are not really there to solve crime. They're not really there to prevent crime. They come after the fact, and even when they come, they harbor attitudes about victims. And this is not just white police officers. Even in the district, we have Black police officers of color, who act aggressively and who manipulate people who are in the trenches. So we need a solution in which we are taking responsibility for what we can't take responsibility for, and we take back control of our communities.
Yeah, and again, the researchers of this report said that the high rates of homicide involving firearms among minority youths might owe to the stress of living in poor communities, systemic racism, or multi-generational poverty resulting from limited education and economic opportunities. Again, when we talk about, and I know we're running short on time, but I want to go to Paris and to ReShonda. When we talk about reparations, these things have to be considered, right?
Yeah, yes, they definitely do. One of the things, the reparations is a tricky one for me. I would love to see African Americans reimbursed for things that our ancestors went through. I would like for us to have to be assured that we're going to do the right thing. I don't know that many in our community are where we need to be to invest that back into our community, any type of reparations. So I'd like to see a sound plan to change our economic hardships. I agree with Sam that I would love to see the African American community figure out a way to police our own, to uplift our own, to support our own. We're not there yet. I wish we had the leaders to get us there. And I'm going to hold out hope that we will get there.
Paris.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, reparations, that's a great foundational start, right? We've had so many other populations that have more of an advantage that we've had. And so certainly that would be something we need to start from the ground somewhere. And yeah, I can see where that would be a great start. How? I agree with Yolanda. Are we where we need to be to even if we were to get it? How, what's the game plan? What's the strategy to ensure its effectiveness? Like, how do we do? How do we deal with that once we get it?
Yeah, Sam, we have about 30 seconds. I wanted to make sure that you got a chance to chime in since I mentioned that word reparations.
I stand in line with my colleagues on the line. We need reparations of our soul. We need to reconcile differences within ourselves. And I would also like to see Democrats take more of a hardline push on reparations. It's an election year. Let's not get distracted by other issues on our plate. Let's make reparations a priority. It's my understanding that it's sort of kicking the can down the road. And speaking with advocates, I would like to see more pressure on that this year.
Sam P.K. Collins of the Washington Informer, Paris Brown, the associate editor of the Baltimore Times, and ReShonda Tate Billingsley, the editor of the Defender in Houston. We thank you so much, each of you, for this powerful conversation. Later today, the National Newspaper Publishers Association will be meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris, our chair, Karen Carter Richards, the president and CEO, Dr. Ben Chavis, and other publishers will be meeting with the vice president. We will bring you details of that conversation on Let It Be Known next week. But everybody, thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and stay well. We will see you then.
Thank you.